Welcome to Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. A quick note before we start, this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube with the link on our website, ICSSmarx.org, which will appear within the next few days. And again, welcome to Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. In pre-pandemic times, this weekly program was hosted at the Niebel Proctor Marxist Library, located in Oakland, California, USA. Since the pandemic, we've been meeting every Sunday on Zoom. And today we have speakers and participants from throughout the US and around the world. My name is Alan Miller, and I'm a member of the program committee that organizes the Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library meetings. And I would like to start off by saying that we always welcome input, feedback, suggestions for topics and speakers. You can sign up for email notifications for our meetings and contact us through our website at ICSSmarx.org. For over a decade and a half, Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library programs have been a platform for diverse presentations on a variety of topics, such as working class struggles, political economy, socialism, communism, the fight against imperialism, militarism and war, and the environmental movement, and the fight for racial and gender justice. We want to remind everyone that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate, and as such, we ask that you show respect to other participants and the moderator of today's session. Please note that the opinions expressed are those of the speaker and participants. They do not necessarily represent those of the ICSS or the Marxist Library. Our session today, we have a great session lined up, is titled Walking the Walk, Marxism in the Working Class. And our speaker is Noah Khrachvik of Midwestern Marx. Some of you will remember that we've actually had several sessions with speakers from Midwestern Marx, a Midwestern U.S. educational institute dedicated to eliminating the divide between socialists and the U.S. working class. With Noah speaking today, we now have had, I guess it's all three co-directors of the institute, maybe the three co-founders of the institute. Noah can comment on that. The Institute has a website at midwesternmarx.com where you can check out a lot of their content, which includes links to their YouTube channel, Midwestern Marx, that offers video interviews, discussions on theory, political analysis, and live shows to over 25,000 subscribers. And I think that number is from last year, Noah. So if you want to update us, let us know. Noah is a working class member of the Communist Party USA and co-director of the Midwestern Marx Institute. When he isn't busy writing, organizing the working class, or fixing rich people's houses all day, he enjoys absolutely nothing on the couch, surrounded by his family and books by Henry Winston. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Noah. We're going to go for about 45 minutes to an hour, Noah's presentation. We'll take a short break for announcements, and then we'll have question and answer session from the audience. So with that, take it over, Noah.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. It's an honor to be here with you guys tonight. Actually, we are approaching 30,000 followers for our YouTube account right now, I believe. But yeah, good morning, everybody. Before I begin, I just want to say it really is an honor to be here with all of you today. I've seen more than a handful of the videos from your Sunday mornings, and I find the kind of honest search for the real way forward that's embodied in these presentations I see, in the questions I see, in the discussions is sadly rare in our era. I think too often we get bogged down in pettiness and bickering and pointless backbiting and arguing. If we add up all the hours that so-called revolutionaries have spent arguing over things that fundamentally do not matter in the process of our class struggle, like what was voted on at the sixth plenum meeting of the Soviet Politburo, or the countless not real socialism debates. We'd spend so much time adding that we'd get old and die before we got to the end. And that needs to stop, and this is one of the things we'll be discussing today, but I really don't want to get ahead of myself. I'm Noah Khrachvik, and I grew up in a working class household that is somewhat unique. My house was always pro-communist and pro-Soviet. my grandparents were both from the Soviet Union and emigrated here in the early 50s. So my grandfather fought in the Red Army when the Nazis invaded, and then they left a few years after that. They weren't communists, they weren't anti-communists, they were just regular people, right? My grandmother always loved Stalin, however, because she saw Stalin as sort of the bulwark between them and anti-Semites. I mean, I could get into my whole family history, but that's not really a big thing. So I grew up in the class struggle. My dad wasn't a communist, but he was a union man who was obviously friendly with communists as he worked for the UAW for a very long time. So I grow up around this class struggle. I'm on strike lines all the time, etc. And in my teenage years, you know, like everybody, I get a little rebellious. I tell my dad, screw Marxism and all this stuff, and I'm moving to LA to play music. I'm going to be a rock star. Well, clearly that, you know, doesn't happen. But what happens when I'm in LA is that the Bernie Sanders movement begins, right? And I was so nihilistic and jaded, and I figured that, you know, revolution was never going to happen here, so why bother with anything? But this changes things for me. I start seeing young people whom I really hadn't seen around the movement ever getting involved and taking it upon themselves to get active. And that sort of inspired me. And I'd spent already years and years studying, you know, Marx and Lenin, and I figured that maybe I have something I can add. And I felt like I was letting people down if I didn't at least try to come back and help. So I get back involved, join the party, and I'm sort of refreshing myself on all the Marxism and such. And I run across Carlos and Eddie, who had founded the Midwestern Marx Institute less than a year before that. And I sent Carlos an email asking him if he was looking for writers. And he says that's really funny because I was writing you an email yesterday to ask if you wanted to write for us. So, excuse me, I'm a bit of a coffee addict. I'm going to be drinking coffee this whole time. So we hook up, and you know, I just get more and more into the Institute. That's sort of half of my life right now, is helping build a lot of really exciting stuff at the Midwestern Marx Institute. We sort of founded this directorship, right, that is Carlos, Eddie, and me, out of the three most active people that were contributing the most to building concrete things. And where I come in is I sort of laid the groundwork to begin what we call our Marxism school, which is a completely online set of courses that we're setting up almost like a college, right? Where there's different subjects and you sign up for classes. It's all done over the internet. But it's all in Marxism. My first class I taught could not have gone better. It was on the basics of Marxism, sort of teaching people how to do their own Marxist analysis, something we think is essential in connecting Marxism once again to the working class here in our country. In regards to the Institute, we're working on a few different things, and this will be the last thing I say about it. We see something of a new labor movement rising, right? And the task for us becomes, how do we connect the theory that helps us understand society and therefore how to change it with working class people who are already radicalizing of their own accord, right? The new labor movement includes things like the UAW and Sean Fain, the ALU and Chris Smalls, right? Things like this. At the same time, we also see this new form of Marxism sort of overcoming a lot of the mistakes of the last period of our history. Something we see, we call it American Marxism for lack of a better word, but we see this being synthesized in our era based on new theoretical contributions that it takes this higher stage of imperialism that we seem to be in now to sort of understand and begin theorizing. Like I consider personally one of the greatest things I've done in my life editing Carlos's book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. For us, this is essential theory that helps us understand all of the mistakes we're making and therefore how to rectify them. Another part of this is a theory I call reproletarianization, which we're going to get into in the sort of different stratums of working classes we have now. But yeah, that's really me, where I'm at, where we're at with the Institute. I've always been involved in community organizing, so I'm really active in my neighborhood. And other than that, I'm just working and writing and reading, you know. But that brings us to sort of my main presentation. So right now in 2023, it seems that we're approaching another time of great change in the world, right? And specifically in our country. As technology advances in leaps and bounds, the anti-imperialist bloc rises in the world stage, and the conditions of our working classes here deteriorate. Even as we seem to get technologies and commodities that the people of Marx or Lenin's day would marvel at, the conditions of regular working class people in what is still, at least for the time being, the richest nation in the world are becoming impossible. The American dream, right, of the 20th century seems like it's effectively dead in the 21st, where many of our parents or grandparents or even us back in the day could work a good union job in a factory, creating new value in the society, in the economy, where we could support our families and experience a life of genuine stability. The vast majority of our country right now, between 60 and 80% of people, depending on which study you're looking at, now struggles paycheck to paycheck. And just about everyone is swimming in debt, right? These conditions, the rapid deterioration and onset of instability that begins to trickle in during the 1970s and accelerates with the change of primary capital accumulation to its speculation phase, which happens in 2008, they're what we often refer to as the objective conditions necessary for revolution, the impossibility of society continuing on in the old way. Revolution don't ever happen because people are exploited or oppressed. If that were the case, chattel slavery would have been over in a week. The countless peasant revolts of feudal Europe would have produced a new system in months. But that didn't happen, right? Because revolution only happens when it becomes impossible for society to continue on in the old way. Or as Lenin says, the working classes can't just want change. The ruling class must need change. The forces of production, right? They outmode the old relations of production, forcing the repressed classes into motion, forcing the sort of showdown between the sides of this social contradiction. Things must change at that point, either with us winning and a new thing being built, or the ruling class winning and instituting fascism to maintain its hold on power. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. The topic here isn't today isn't how bad things are or the basics of revolutionary change, but instead, what can we do about it and what that doing about it looks like. Marxism teaches us that in capitalist society, it's the proletariat that's uniquely situated to organize itself into a class for itself, right? And lead the world into that revolution, just as the bourgeois class did before it. But how do we get that done, right? How do we actually move forward from where we are here in 2023 to where we need to go? That's a question that I hope I can at least contribute in some small part an answer to. In order to know how to move forward, we need to know where we are and how we got here. That's what Marxism gives us, right? A scientific view of history and society. And everything really, but mostly we use it in regards to history and society. It's this scientific view that Lenin his own self called the sharpest weapon of the proletariat. But we haven't really done much sharpening of that weapon here in the US. I mean, sure, Marxism has come here, and there have been some absolutely heroic people involved in our class struggle. But the sharpening, not so much. our Marxism was originally a Soviet Marxism, right? From the Soviet party directly to ours. And then you have all the fake Marxism, of course, the bourgeois academics and culturalists, and more post theories than I've ever been able to shake any number of sticks at, right? But this has always been a sort of bourgeois project of misdirection where it concerns us. Less than not helpful, it's counterproductive, which is why the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, the CIA, Open Society Foundation, and State Department have worked so hard to spread it all over the country and tell people it is Marxism. When you think you know what a thing is, you don't go looking any further, you know? The bourgeois theories that masquerade as Marxism have only gotten more and more pervasive as time's gone on. And this has been where we have lacked sorely in the past, the theory department. American pragmatism, part of the building blocks of our particular social consciousness, it serves us very well in some ways, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Taking strict leadership from the Soviets, for example, it helped out tremendously in practical concerns with funding, direct organizational structures, international support, etc. But it also left us pretty dogmatic in listening to whatever it was the Soviets were telling us. And as brilliant as some theorists of the Soviet Union were, like Ilyenkov, for example, whom we take great inspiration from at the Institute, they weren't here, right? And importing theory is making a mistake in our Marxism that Ilyenkov himself could tell us about. It's a mistake it's mistaking the particular for the universal. Anyway, this prevents an organic, particular form of Marxism unique to our struggles, our conditions, and our people taking shape and arising out of those particular forms of struggle and particular conditions. This is why we can only now, in this late stage of imperialism, recognize W.E.B. Du Bois as the father of American Marxism. That's what we call him at the Institute, by the way, the father of American Marxism. It's Du Bois that gives us a foundation for understanding the American trajectory and the dialectical materialist view of our history. Or if we want to jargon it up a little bit, Marxism-Leninism is, of course, universal. But to become concrete, a universal must arise in a particular form according to the particular conditions that give rise to that particular form of the universal. Like Chinese socialism is not Soviet socialism, Mao Zedong thought, Xi Jinping theory, etc., are not Bolshevism. They arose as particular forms of Marxism-Leninism organically from the struggles of the Chinese people. It's in the relation between particular and universal that we find the real. That's what Marx teaches us, right? He also teaches us that theory becomes concrete as it grips the masses. And the American masses just won't ever embrace a theory that comes from Russia or China, especially when we add in the ever-present fact that we are significantly outgunned in the information war, and these places are demonized like crazy. Luckily, as our Communist Party used to say, communism is also as American as apple pie, precisely in this particularization, though. And that's been missing all through the last period of our history. But you might be wondering why I'm blathering on about universals and particulars and Du Bois when this is supposed to be about Marxism and its relationship to the broad working class, right? I know I would be anyway. So I'll explain, right? In order to understand where we need to go, it's essential that we understand where we are and how we got here, right? Like I was saying earlier, for this, the creation of an American Marxism, to understand the American trajectory, it's incredibly useful. And this is where Du Bois comes in. It's Du Bois who explained in materialist terms what he called the problem of the color line, right? Or one of, if not the most prominent form of class struggle in American history. In understanding this and its relationship with the rise and fall of the unique form of middle classes that come from imperialism and its rise to a highest stage right here in the US of A is what we need in order to do that. So I hope it's all right if I go over my own sort of small theoretical contribution to that American Marxism I'm talking about, or at least, what I hope could be, so we can sort of get to this. It's something we call reproletarianization at the Institute. That way we can get a good idea of where we are and why the relationship between Marxism and the working classes is both different and the same, at least as I see it. I'll be brief about it, I promise. I know I've wasted a lot of time already. Reproletarianization is, to be extremely brief, the death of the middle classes in the West. And I know every time you say middle class, you get somebody chiming in and going, but middle class isn't a Marxist term, which is kind of strange because Marx used the term pretty frequently, like in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, where he explains how middle classes can't seem to see out of that middle. And they believe they stand above all class antagonisms, though such a thing is kind of impossible from a materialist point of view. And just as a side note, we see all sorts of forms of this middle class radicalism that denies class altogether today, right? Or separates it inherently from the particular struggles of the working class. To give a modern example, the Netflix walkouts. I'm not sure if anyone remembers them, maybe a year back or two. These were comfortable, well-off professionals, right? Who organized a walkout because Dave Chappelle had said something pretty mean, according to them. And it may have been mean, it may not. I'm not here to judge either way. But this was a struggle of those middle classes, right? It was for middle class reasons and had middle class demands. Led us into that corporate authority. We want our views, not yours, represented in this bourgeois organization. The entire thing was wrapped in transgender issues, which have real working class concerns of their own. But there was not a single demand for the regular transgender workers within that company, who statistically made less than others in similar positions. Instead, they wanted themselves put in charge and Dave Chappelle's content removed, something that couldn't really matter less to the people struggling to get by sweeping those floors or fixing bugs in their app. I don't want to get super deep into this, really. It's just an example of a middle class radicalism, not seeing out of the middle. Other than that, the whole Marxism doesn't have middle classes response. You also get an academic view of the notion of a middle class, that it's a sort of false consciousness instilled in working class people in order to dupe us into believing that we share some commonality with the boss. But this looks at class in what Marx and Engels would call a mistake of metaphysics, freezing it in time and forgetting that all-important universal, in particular, in its ascension to the concrete. Sure, it sees class as a concrete relationship between workers and owners, but it only sees this. In this mistake, we could call movie stars proletarians with false consciousness, or even CEOs, and that just don't seem quite right. To have a Marxist view of a middle class, to really think about such a concept within the materialist dialectic, it can only be viewed as something that lies somewhere between that that relationship, right? Boss and worker, somewhere between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, like peasants in the days of the October Revolution. Marx explains the essential outcomes of the rise of the proletariat in the era of industrial production over the length of Capital One, focusing mostly in Capital One. He goes into it in 2 and 3 too, but most of the focus on this is in 1. And he explains that due to the way industrialized production must take place, it proletarianizes huge swaths of people, right? People thrust out of a formerly more stable way of living, peasants, etc., and then jams them into factories where the processes of capital and capital accumulation leave them with only their labor to sell, unable to get ahead. The oldie-timey equivalent of struggling paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford a $500 emergency. Wages are always driven down to that place that leaves this proletariat in a position of barely scraping by, unable to accumulate enough wealth for stability, unable to accumulate anything more than means of consumption. That's an essential characteristic. Now, in the USA, after World War II, something happens that changes all that, right? Because of the advance of technology, the destruction of most of the rest of the industrialized world, giving rise to monopoly finance and creating accumulated capital in numbers that were just unthinkable in Marx's day, and the class struggle rising up against capital, the working classes of the West and the USA in particular won a basic form of stability from the ruling class. It won access to home ownership and a whole lot more. Or rather, the sections of the working class deemed white did. This strips large sections of working people, productive workers building commodities, of that essential proletarian character, as they now had more than labor to sell, doesn't it? It changes the way the entire process happens. It changes the relationship. And this is why we see the rise of the Black freedom movement becoming once again the primary form of class struggle in the USA as that played out, which accomplishes a political revolution with the civil rights movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that changes social relations here forever, right? Forever. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, we see imperialism entering its fully consolidated stage. And this is what lays the groundwork for reproletarianization. The US is effectively deindustrialized at this point, right? Our major industries are service and technology based. With the rise of the internet and AI, which is actually a bigger leap in technology than the steam engine and printing press, the beginning of industrial capital could ever have hoped to be. And finance capital fully consolidated into a handful of cartels that own everything, with speculation, and this is important, with speculation and not the creation of surplus value through commodity production as their primary form of capital accumulation. With the creation of the gig economy and debt, interest, stock and securities, and currency exchange manipulation, larger parts of the imperial economy than ever before, we seem to be approaching a time where once again, the relations of production might be outmoded by the forces of production. And I know this is a big statement, right? I explain it in my pamphlet on reproletarianization, but feel free to ask any questions. If you have any, we can go over it. And as we see with the increasingly dangerous and desperate actions of our ruling class on the world stage, imperialism itself seems to have entered a crisis to which there is no solution where things remain the same, right? As the anti-imperialist bloc rises, the empire seems to deteriorate, right? Entering what we call in the sort of jargon, it's decaying or moribund stage, which it just wasn't in back when, Lenin was writing the imperialism book. Things progress. All of this creates two main phenomena within the working classes. First, it creates the process we call reproletarianization, or millions of formerly stable people who would be within those working middle and professional classes losing that stability that was essential in the loss of the proletarian character. This is the reproletariat. Now, you might be asking, why do we need a whole new category for them, Noah? Why not just talk about the working class, right? We have to remember, again, the universal and particular. This is a part of Marxism that's always been missing in the US. This is a new thing, a new form of a thing arising. Technology has advanced far beyond the days of industrial capitalism, which is what gave rise to the proletariat in the first place. It was a socialized production and privatized accumulation, that contradiction that created the social consciousness and role of the proletariat. But this reproletariat has no giant factories of the productive bourgeoisie to work in, not in the US. It has instead small offices, storefronts, and more the gig economy, completely cut off from all other workers, changed into a new relationship. This primary form of social interaction, the workplace, where society itself is reproduced, as Lenin says, every day, every hour, right? It's largely been being individualized. And the speed with which all stability is deteriorating is incredibly fast. Not to mention the debt factor, right? Debt for cars, debt for homes. They even literally have debt for debt these days. All of that is capital accumulation for finance, of course. And a big part of the contradiction the reproletariat finds itself in. Not with industrial capital, as the proletariat does, but with finance capital itself. No longer is it a sort of mystified relation for the reproletariat like it was with the in the early days of the proletariat, or even now for most of the productive and proletariat. It's a direct contradiction with finance capital. But this isn't a talk on the reproletariat. I mean, you can read my pamphlet on the process if you're interested. Really, we just need to understand that these are people who come down to the level of the proletariat, still imbued with middle-class social consciousness. And this is one hard factor to get around in regards to organizing. All the social chauvinism and individualism of the middle classes, but packed into precarity like the air they pump into bags of potato chips. The reproletariat has a wholly different contradiction than the proletariat does and did, and so we need to account for that. It's being radicalized and organizing itself with things like the barista movement, for example. But due to the individualized nature of its social interactions, a collective social consciousness is just harder to achieve. But to reference the whole universal and particular thing again, just as the printing press gave rise to newspapers and the proliferation of information in the industrial era, the internet does this in sufficient quantity to overcome that problem in ours, at least in my opinion. Now, the second phenomenon the decay of imperialism causes is what we call the new labor movement at the Institute. It is the rise of Sean Fain and the new militancy of the UAW, the UPS strike, the ALU. It is hot labor summer. It is a spontaneous rise of a height of trade union consciousness we haven't seen since the heyday of the union movement back in the early 20th century with the Red Union / CIO integration, etc. These two things need approached very differently because really they're basically two different almost classes we're talking about, two different kinds of social consciousness. And there's a giant culture clash between the two. When approaching these questions and how to organize these sections of society together for the singular goal of socialism, we need to keep in mind the proliferation of the middle classes and the retreat of the communist movement during the last period of American history. I don't think it's really controversial to say that during that period, this thing we call the left and its character, its main class character, changed from what it had been. It became an almost wholly middle class movement. Now, there's some areas that are not, of course, but overall, its class character simply changed. This brings with it, all of this middle class social baggage, their social consciousness, middle class cons, and middle class pros, right? And so when all of these radicalizing reproletarians look for ways to move forward, solutions to the crises they find themselves in, they're greeted by these middle class institutions. And rather than helping to break the individualism inherent within the sort of suburbanite atmosphere, I guess, for lack of a better word, it reinforces it. So as I think I said in the intro, I'm not sure, I'm a carpenter, right? I work in the trades, which is a productive industry, right? It's this sort of old school proletarian social consciousness formed in the working class neighborhoods of the poor parts of Cleveland, Ohio. And I've been around the left for a while now. I tell this story a lot, but I'm going to reiterate it here. I've been in hundreds of meetings for community organizations, socialist groups, etc. I've also organized workers on the job. They're two fundamentally different cultures, two fundamentally different ways of viewing the world and assumptions about what and who people are, approaches to problems, all that. And when these two come together, especially if there's more than one than the other, there's a culture clash. I've been in many meetings where comrades have asked me, Noah, you say all your coworkers are into the idea of socialism, but you never bring them here. Why is that? And I've never answered them honestly, because within that culture clash is one of the big middle class cons. It's always there, but never addressed, because addressing it, it's just incredibly humbling. It's really hard to do. And so I understand people not doing it. But frankly, it's an inability to genuinely criticize oneself. We're given ready-made self-criticisms from the bourgeois academy by the dozen, by the way. But these aren't real, genuine, and humbling self-criticisms of the sort demanded by, say, Stalin's Communist Party in the early Soviet Union. They're instead the opposite of what they say on the box. Check your privilege, for example, is a slogan coming out of privilege theory, right? It's only in the realm of abstract privileges, right? Instructing us to feel bad for some inherent qualities about ourselves, something that divides rather than unites around shared struggles and interests. Now, I'm not here to say those who are interested in privilege theory are wrong per se, or not an essential step along a revolutionary road for some. Only that the theories themselves come from corporate boardrooms and then trickle down to us through HR departments at corporations and NGOs in particular, and the academy, which is where a lot of this middle class left is located. And just as an aside, Christian Parenti, son of the legendary Michael Parenti, wrote an incredible paper on this a few years ago. It's called The First Privilege Walk. Highly, highly recommend it. A lot of this was actually formulated by Herbert Marcuse's wife, believe it or not. Anyway, besides the point, when it comes to concrete barriers towards genuine revolutionary organizing, there's no bourgeois theory to allow us to look down on others we feel are not sufficiently checking a privilege. And this is precisely part of the problem. If I were to bring coworkers to one of these meetings, they would leave within 5 minutes. And the next day at work, I'd have to hear all about how I took them to what amounted to an HR meeting. And those at the meeting would feel justified in an inherent middle-class social chauvinism of our own era. The belief that we, and I include myself in this, by the way, we are somehow enlightened, and everyone who does not conform to our enlightened views in enlightened ways within 5 minutes is backwards and reactionary. And they justify an inability to grow a new connection to the working class as keeping their space safe from these backwards reactionaries. This culture clash becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy and needs addressed if we want to have any hope in a genuine class solidarity. For me, the way to address this is to look at the successful communist organizations that have been run in the past. Lenin attributes the victory of the October Revolution to, quote, most iron discipline. And it's this discipline that is severely lacking in our organizations and parties. We are starting from scratch in an era where revolutionary potential is increasing at an exponential rate. Sure, we've gained some ground, but it's not enough and it's not fast enough. The lack of discipline and ownership of even what being a communist means by real dedicated revolutionaries of the proletariat and reproletariat, that's felt in the broad masses. There's no longer that connection that allowed things like the CIO or the Civil Rights Council to be built. I wrote a paper on this a while back called Walking the Walk, How to Conduct Ourselves as Communists. And it draws from the lessons taught by Lenin and Che Guevara. I want to sort of summarize this here because I believe this is the central focus of everything in our practical activity. I mean, if that's okay, because it's sort of only changing the atmosphere of the concrete institutions we have, or by creating new institutions that fulfill qualities such as these, that I believe we can have any hope at succeeding in creating hosts of new revolutionaries, and more importantly, maybe, in winning the support of the masses. There's a reason, after all, that the Communist Party USA had its highest base of support during the McCarthyism era, after all. This was after a landmark national convention where the party examined its class character and asked itself, why are we all intellectuals, petty bourgeoisie, and other middle classers? And from there, it set about rectifying the situation. Rather than simply deciding they were the true communists and, telling everyone else how bad they were, they set about making themselves into better communists. This is what won the ability to genuinely connect with the working masses in the proper conditions, rather than looking down on them for, not being as enlightened as we believe we are. Lenin says, excuse me. Oh, I have a frog in my throat. Lenin says in a speech to a communist youth league in 1920, if a communist took it into his head to boast about his communism because of the ready-made conclusions he had acquired without putting in a great deal of serious and hard work, without understanding the facts which he must examine critically, he will be a very deplorable communist. Such superficiality would decidedly be fatal. Now, Lenin's speech to these young communists in the early 20th century could very easily be given to young people learning Marxism in the USA of the 21st century. It's much easier to talk the talk than it is to walk the walk. It's easy to wake up one day and say, I think I will call myself a communist today. From there, we could, buy a t-shirt with Karl Marx's face on it. We could put a little hammer and sickle in all our social media profiles. We could tell everyone we believe in communism. But I don't think that would make us a communist, would it? If we're interested in viewing things from the Marxist perspective, this is backwards from how we should be going about things. It's not, after all, people's consciousness that determines their existence, but on the contrary, their social existence that determines their consciousness. From the Marxist perspective, the material world is primary, and our thoughts and ideas are reflections of that primary material world, right? So what would a communist be by this sort of criteria? A communist would be someone fulfilling what communism is, what the process of communism is. If we're speaking of sort of embodying this thing called communist and viewing what that is, we have to embody this process, right? The sort of real movement of history, as Marx called it. Even being a member of a communist party isn't enough, right? How many members of groups we're in have no interest whatsoever in overthrowing capitalism and becoming the types of people capable of carrying out such an immense task, right? But all that aside, I want to get into sort of the way I believe communists need to conduct themselves, because it's this that sort of organically wins the respect of working people, whether they're within the reproletariat or proletariat. And so I'm going to read a bit from my essay on Walking the Walk, where I say a communist must hold his or herself to the highest standard possible, even if the organization they belong to is not yet built or rebuilt itself into an institution capable of demanding they do so. In fact, in doing this building, they're helping to build that organization into just such an institution and leading those not there yet, like the folks mentioned above, by setting an example. The Bolsheviks were just such a party, but we should always be realistic and approach our current situation with clear eyes and clear heads. In 2023, we're in a period of ascendancy, but there's a lot of ground to cover to even bring ourselves to the level of the old Communist Party, let alone surpassing that and becoming the sort of institutions capable of leading the American people through the struggles ahead and into revolution. And we're not going to get there by just putting hammer and sickle emojis in our Twitter profiles and then telling everyone who doesn't have every opinion we do how awful they are. The Bolsheviks didn't gain the support and respect of the working masses of the Soviet Union by bragging and talking down to them. The massively powerful and effective Chinese party didn't win their support, which is currently at an 85% approval rating, by the way, by continually organizing witch hunts against each other or trolling each other online or making up lies and, backbiting each other or any of that. They lead by example. And an American communist needs to do the same. If we intend to overthrow what is essentially the most powerful ruling class in human history, then even learning our theory, analyzing the world with Marxism, and dropping the sort of bourgeois theories we mentioned above, like standpoint epistemology and things like that, is not enough. Shaping the theory of our era is not enough. We must also deal in shaping ourselves into the people who can earn the respect and support of the toiling masses. And in fact, it is that theory that leads us to this conclusion. If we keep in mind that the default way that the people are trained to view things without even knowing other ways are possible is through a sort of modern brand marketing economy of fully, consolidated monopoly, then we must create a brand of communists that disproves all the lies spread about us from the ruling class over the last 100 years in all their forms. even being correct is not enough. If we do not package a correct message in a way that appeals to regular working class people, we are learning nothing about the people and allowing middle class prejudices to maintain dominance. And I don't know about you, but pretending we're those enlightened few and everybody else isn't is just not the way I roll. It's precisely what Mao was talking about when he said that a communist must humble him or herself before the people. In order for communists to lead the people, we must recognize that the people are the ones leading communists. And this means we need to carry ourselves a certain way, especially approaching organized workers who are organized already, unions and things like this, right? Unions are militarizing on their own without us right now, right? We need to work on making ourselves into a certain thing, basically. We must be above reproach and humble, strong, capable, and intelligent. We need to never take ourselves too seriously, even as this task is the most serious task in the world. For every 100 people I see who call themselves communists these days, I can honestly say I only see a few who actually carry themselves as such. It's something I work to achieve. Like, I don't think of myself as above all this either. So I want to go over a few qualities that for Lenin and Che Guevara, especially, a communist must have, because it's very easy to just say we're a communist and it's another thing altogether to make ourselves worthy of this. And so a communist leads by example. It's not necessary for a communist to brag or tell everyone how wonderful he is. It's low, trite, beneath the communist. Stooping to such petty bourgeois self-aggrandizement is anathema for the process of communism, and therefore should be anathema for communists. We can show that no better than on the job site, right? Whether it's on the shop floor or the office cubicle or the assembly line. Being the first to help coworkers is something I pride myself on. I'm the last to call up and put my work on others. And I try to be the most knowledgeable at the task, the one everybody in the shop can depend on for knowledge whenever they need it, right? Communist also needs to be the most diligent and dedicated of studiers, right? Seeking knowledge in order to help liberate the working masses. She doesn't need to treat education in a way to feel superior to others or simply memorize conclusions in order to sound smart and show off to her peers. She ponders these conclusions deeply and instead begins to understand the process of arriving at them and helps her brothers and sisters of the working class learn more, bringing them up and not putting them down. I want to skip to sort of the end of this. So when we're deciding on a course of action, I always try to think about having to explain that action to my kids, right? Or, my parents or Henry Winston. Would they respond by saying what I'm doing is a good thing? Would they respect it? Or would Henry Winston see me trying to bring myself up at the expense of some random stranger online and greet it with disappointment? I think I know what that would be. I'm getting to a point, though, where I really want to sort of make it more of a conversation than a presentation. Because in the interaction with the working masses, it's not just about what I think or you think, but what all of us think together. And I think that, as I say, it's not about what I think. I say I think. Sorry. But I think that's where the real insight can be found, in answering questions of each other, asking questions of each other, and putting these sort of things I laid out into a way of practical application together. And that'll do it for me. Thank you again so much for having me, guys. It's an honor to speak to you all. I thank you.
Okay. What we're going to do now is take a short break for announcements. What I want to remind everybody is, if you have questions or comments about the presentation and the subject of today's session, go down to the bottom of your window, your Zoom window, and there's a reactions button, and you can click on it to raise your hand. We already have a few people. Wow, the hands are just like flying up. So I will try to take most of the questions in the order in which they are people raise their hands, but please be patient with me. And we should have a good discussion till about 12:30. In the
Can I ask a
meantime,
question, Alan?
yeah, sure.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Now, are you doing the announcements now and then the questions after? Or
Yeah.
okay,
We
I just
did it.
wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Okay. So let me just make a couple of quick announcements. We have a couple of interesting sessions that are coming up. Next week, we have Mark Albertson, who will be speaking on Ceasefire Korea, the tragic split and its contemporary implications. Mark has been a frequent presenter. He's a military historian, very popular speaker at our sessions, and he'll be talking about the Korean War and the recent anniversary of the armistice and basically kind of the military situation in the context of today's world. So that's Mark Albertson next Sunday, October 8th, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. Following that, on October 15th, we have Stansfield Smith, who'll be speaking on the national security state and the Biden administration lawfare against Trump. And this session, I think, is going to be very, very interesting. I want to encourage people to come in and let's have a very good debate about this. Stan will be talking about the indictments against former President Trump and how people on the left should regard that politically, and also basically what's going on in the political sphere as far as the contention between the two parties here, the two capitalist parties here in the US. So next week, Ceasefire Korea with Mark Albertson. Following week, Stan Smith on the national security state and the Biden administration. I also want to remind everybody that you can go to our website at ICSSmarx.org, ICSSmarx.org, and there'll be a pop-up that'll come up after a couple of seconds where you can enter your name and your email address, and you will be placed on our email notification list where you'll get, excuse me, a weekly notification of our sessions. And you can always opt out. We don't sell the names in our list. We don't, it's all private, but it's a good way to stay on top of what we're doing. We also have all of our past, past sessions for, quite a few years that were posted on YouTube. On there, you can sort of trace through and find past sessions from there. We also have a contact form where you can contact us if you have any questions or suggestions. And we also have a donation form if you want to donate to our activities. So with that, I'm going to flip over to the, wow, we have a lot of hands up. We have 8 hands up. And I'm going to start off with Rich J, who will go first. If you would unmute yourself. And from there, I'm going to go to Raj Sahai. And what I'm going to ask everybody to do is to please try to keep your comments down to about 2 minutes or so. So please go ahead. Rich J, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, Noah, thank you very much, first of all. I want to say something that happened between me and a comrade maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. His name is Gary Hicks, and we lost him about a year ago. I'm not sure exactly, but I spent quite a bit of time with him, and I used to meet with him regular, and I asked one of the best questions I ever asked him. I asked him a lot of questions. Was, Gary, if how could we share and use Marxist theory, starting with the things like class struggle, and I'm trying to think of the precise words right now, but especially philosophy, things like how can we use the theory or the ideas around dialectical and historical materialism in the day-to-day class struggle, how can we share that with our comrades and then interact with the work through the work we do with whatever issues we're working on, or things that come up and we have to go out in the street with our friends because that's where we got to go, whatever. So you understand. So he said, well, he didn't say anything. I watched his eyes, his face light up, like I could hear his brain going, Rich, you finally asked the right question. So that's it. And I want to thank you, Noah, for, in some ways, for me, the first session or person I can think of in quite a while, through not just through our Sunday mornings, but anywhere, that's starting to touch that question that I asked him. He didn't give me a direct answer, but I knew that made his brain go bang, 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 bang real quick, So I just want to say thank you very much for the presentation today. I'm looking forward to getting a couple of y'all's books and yours or the other two dudes you work with. Thank you very much. Go for it, Alan.
Thank you so much, Rich. Yeah, I think honestly, it's missing that application of Marxism, and I think a lot of it has to do with all of the misinformation spread over the last period of history. There is a Marxist thinker that we work with frequently at the Institute named Gabriel Rockhill, and he has sort of tracked the history of what we call the fake left, right? This sort of stratum of controlled counter hegemony, to put it in Gramscian terms. And he tracks the entire history of it. He has an entire theory wrapped around it of what he calls the global theory industry. And in our era, young people grow up, and rather than having that old Communist Party and Henry Winston and Bill Foster on posters downtown, and being able to sort of have the Soviet Union right there, etc., the Chinese are way more hands off, right? They grow up thinking this fake left is what Marxism is. And so the question really becomes, how do we get Marxism back, right? And for us at the Institute, this is one of the reasons we built the Marxism School, why we offer the basics class for free always, right? For anyone who wants to take it, because when we learn these basics, when we learn this dialectical and historical materialism, it changes the way we look at everything in society, everything. And so we approach our problems differently. Our solutions become different, right? As Lenin teaches us, trade union consciousness on its own stays trade union consciousness. And that's, I mean, let's be real, it's more advanced than most of the left right now. So bringing that around and using the tools of our era to do it, we think can really answer the question you asked your friend.
Okay, next will be Raj, if you would unmute yourself, followed by Mario, and then Richard Wright. So Raj, please go ahead.
Hi. So, Noah, great presentation. I'm very excited that Midwestern Marx Institute is doing this great job of spreading Marxism and holding classes. Now, I agree with you that with at least 2/3 of the people living paycheck to paycheck in a gig economy, really this is proletarianization in substance for the American workers. And there is a consciousness that is still attached to previous era, which needs to be changed. And I think, but so there's a lot of work, and I agree with you. Communists have to be humble and not be saying, I know it all, I'll tell you. Learn from workers' actual lives. So I think that's right on. But along with this effort, there needs to be a revolutionary theory because that's what binds all this movement together. Now, Lenin had that, and he said a revolutionary theory is essential for a revolution to occur. It's not just simply enough. Otherwise, you will organize people, but they will go in different directions. So I would like to hear from you in American context, what is that revolutionary theory? And if you overthrow capitalism, can capitalist relations of production remain as they do in China, in the United States? And will the workers follow? If you say, well, we'll recreate China, will you have any appeal here? And if not, what is the vision for, and which is theory provides, is to what is the goal here? That's my question. Thank you.
It's a very good question. Lenin's quote on this, he says that without the most advanced revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And there's a part of that quote that I think we often overlook, where he says the most advanced revolutionary theory. And this, Lenin says this, I might be wrong about this, but I believe he says this right as he's getting back into his philosophy term, when he begins reading Hegel, right? And he goes back and realizes a lot of what I thought about Marxism was on the surface. It's so much deeper than that. And actually, all those Marxists of the last period, the Second International, they weren't Marxists at all. None of them understood Marxism, right? And I feel like we're going through a new particular form of that same thing right now. And for us, this revolutionary theory, we call it American Marxism, something that comes not from, the Soviet Union or Germany, where Marx was from, or any of that, or China, but right here in the US. Now, Marx, Lenin, etc., these are universally scientifically applicable additions to the entire dialectic. But always there's that particular form. And for us, that begins with W.E.B. Du Bois. That begins with the understanding of what we call the three revolutions. The revolution to overthrow the British colonizer, the revolution to overthrow slavery, and the political revolution that we call the civil rights movement. Now, all of these come along at a time that society it could not go forward any other way. And what happened were there were theories that led to these revolutions. You should read the sociologists of Du Bois's day. Brilliant stuff, but it's him in particular that understands the Civil War as a revolution, and the uprising of the slaves then freedmen as a general strike, and puts it in these materialist terms that for us begins everything and lays our foundation, because it points to the particularity of the American people becoming the American people over this time, right? After the Civil Rights Revolution, we are not as separated as we were. We are closer together than ever. The King's movement changes everything, and we often don't give them enough credit. Even as we say we credit them, we talk about the ever-pervasive problems of racism that are still around. But right now, this country is less racist than it's ever been before in its history. That's a monumental achievement, and so many fought and died for that. It's this that's from the soil of the American proletariat, becoming the American people over time, or to put it in a jargony word, actualizing over time, that creates the American form of Marxism for us.
Okay.
But the second part of my question was, what's the vision for the society? Have you thought about that? Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I have a tendency to ramble, so I apologize. Yeah, we're never gonna. No American will accept copying the Chinese, even after we accomplish the slow task of undemonizing these people. Like that's happening with Russia right now. Even as our media demonizes and demonizes Russia almost as much as they were doing in the 50s, people are sick of it. No one has any trust anymore in the institutions of the ruling class. And that's important because they say, oh, the media is telling me to hate Russia. Maybe I shouldn't hate Russia, right? And this is going to happen with China as well. But even when that happens, Americans are never going to copy China, if that were even possible, which it's not. The American socialism that rises will only be American. And I see that having a strong entrepreneurialism to it, at least at first, especially the way China does it with their example. We can learn from them and not copy them, right? It's just that we're too far into this ideologically for that to just completely flip overnight. You know, the new always contains within it the old.
Okay, next is Mario, Richard Wright, and then Janet. So Mario, if you would, you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I appreciate it. Sorry about my camera. I'm on a walk. Quickly, in terms of having an international outlook, how would you look at the role of international revolutions prior in the terms of defeating slavery and confronting slavery now? And also in terms of this country practically lording it over the rest of the world, getting a paycheck here might look very different than getting a paycheck in India and China and in Central America and Africa and the rest of the world. So the question is that in your mass line in particular, looking at this country, how do you take that to your base essentially?
What a great question. I actually I'm a guy that thinks about everything before I do it, right? And this is something I wrote into the presentation, and I really wanted to get to this part from my essay, the Walking the Walk thing, and so I left this out because I realized that when I thought I was going to go under time, I was going overtime. So, but I talk to my coworkers about this sort of thing all the time. Because here's what Marxism teaches us, right? It teaches us that the various forms the proletariat arises in and the reproletariat now share a common material interest, right? What's good for the working class of China is actually good for the working class right here. And the sort of we just did a whole thing on immigration with Danny. Actually, I'm not sure he made it, but it's to put it in the words I put it to my coworkers. When we think about the alliance of a class in different countries, we need to think about the relationship between the national contradiction we have here with our ruling class and then the one that their entire country has. With who? With our ruling class, right? Michael Parenti had this great thing that he used to constantly hammer home. He used to always tell people to stop letting the ruling class take ownership of us through language. When they say we invaded Iraq, none of us invaded Iraq, right? Our ruling class did. They invaded Iraq. We didn't. And so I draw that line and I try to help coworkers look at Chinese workers or whoever else who get turned into this abstract cartoon for them in the media into just regular working people like you and me who have the same problems, same wants and needs, same enemy, etc. I hope that answers your question, Mario.
I appreciate the answer. I'll let the next person ask the question. Thank you.
Okay, next is Richard Wright, Janet, and then after that will be Roger Harris. So Richard, go ahead.
Oh, it just so happens, thank you. Thank you for a great presentation, Noah. As you were speaking, I had a couple of thoughts that came across my mind, or questions, totally disparate. And so I'll ask them, and I'll let and one of them follows up on what Mario just brought up. The first question I had is this: lately, I listen on the radio. I heard first. I heard 10 years after, with a version of "I'd Love to Turn You On." You may be familiar with it. And then the next, and then a couple of days later, like yesterday, I heard Revolution. Was it number 9 or one of the revolutions? Where chanting about Chairman Mao. And this gets back to your trip to Hollywood to try to be a musician, but it also gets to the question of culture. And I was wondering maybe if you could address that. The second question, and it's totally it's disjoint, but it's related to what Mario said, is what does worker solidarity? What is the meaning of worker solidarity nationally when so many of the workers, for example, in UAW, are producing equipment that's going over to killing people, or internationally? What how do we approach worker solidarity internationally when you have workers who are defending in Ukraine, and you have workers who are fighting to defend the people in the eastern Ukraine against oppression, and that, of course, is splitting us, and that question is really splitting us. I'll let you address that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for 3 amazing questions. So I'll take them as they came. In regards to culture and music, I don't think they could be any more important. And I think they're a real weakness for us. Back in the day, there were giant revolutionary musicians. Everyone in my dad's generation talked about being radicalized through music. We just interviewed Scott Ritter, and he was an anti-communist back in the day. I mean, he's not exactly a communist now. He took the time to tell us in the interview, actually, that he's an American capitalist. And I told him afterwards, give me a week. You won't be. But he was talking about how Pink Floyd and a few songs that Roger Waters wrote changed his mind entirely about war. He was going into the Marines, and he was already doubting it. And now look what he does, right? He's not anti-war in itself. He's pro-peace. Just like, every communist is. When the fascists rose up, we knew we needed to fight them. And people of my dad's generation, I remember them all talking about how music helped radicalize them. And we don't have that anymore. Not really. We have a few here and there. There's, Boots Riley makes some great stuff. Dead Prez, they're old now, but Immortal Technique, people like this, right? But I think it's a weakness, and it's actually something that Eddie and I and Carlos actually all play music. If you look back here, there's a bunch of instruments, right? We're working on a few songs, and hopefully we, people end up liking them. But I think more people should begin learning that stuff. Not only is it fun, but it inspires people. It makes you feel things and understand things in a way that me just talking or you just talking doesn't do. It makes you feel them. And that's really important. And I think as scientific socialists, those feelings, those ideals sometimes get left by the wayside for us. And I don't think they should. Regarding worker solidarity and sort of the things that divide us, like the national and international contradiction, like you gave a great example of, a if a UAW worker is making weapons that are going and killing our brothers and sisters in Russia, right? Well, in Ukraine, but you know what I mean. I think that's one of the things that makes it more important for me anyway, that we sort of put the lessons that we need to take in, that I was sort of trying to relay from Lenin and Che and these people into genuine practice. And all of the great communist heroes from here, especially Henry Winston, William Z. Foster, Gus Hall, they were union men, right? They were union. Elizabeth Flynn was in, Anna Strong was in a union. All of these people were in unions, right? And there was always this question before this, should we enter these reactionary unions or not? And all of them answered, of course we should. We should be, just as Marx taught us, wherever the workers are in motion, no matter what they think the problem is, we need to be there bringing up the property question, right? Explaining what the problem really is. And as we create this connection and reestablish it in our era, I mean, how easy is it going to be with people like Sean Fain as the new president of UAW? These are the most revolutionary changes in a union I've seen in a very long time, especially a big union like UAW. But we rebuild this connection and people get more and more educated, this is going to happen more and more often. You're going to find communists just working their way into these organizations. And I think within the next 10 to 15 years, realistically, we're going to have red unions again. And lastly, the issue of the proxy war and how people deal with sort of, I think, as more of a general question, these giant issues we're given that divide us, right? It's all about education and being able to construct a network of us that can create a working class media apparatus of some sort. Because let's face it, the ruling class owns the internet. They own the airwaves. They own everything. It's something we need to use technology and think outside the box on. But it's all about whatever way we can get the actual truth out. To bring up Michael Parenti yet again, who is quoting, I think, Che at the time, I can't help it if reality is Marxist, right? The truth is on our side. The facts are on our side. We just got to get it to people in a way that they can understand it.
Okay, next is Janet, followed by Roger, followed by Peter, and then Gene. Please be patient, everybody. We have a pretty long list. Those of you who have questions, don't hesitate to hit the reactions button and raise your hand. So go ahead, Janet, please proceed.
Well, actually, I was not next.
Janet, go ahead. I've got the order. Please go ahead.
But can you take a few others before me, please?
Okay. Roger, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Noah, for a terrific presentation. I'm a big fan of Midwestern Marx. I had two things I wanted to go on. One was to get into you about the nature of the Black liberation movement and Martin Luther King's relationship to it. But I don't think I can do that in 2 minutes and still do the other thing. And the other thing is a proposal. You alluded to the changes that are taking place within the left movement, and particularly the polarizing situation with Ukraine, which is really, it's a fault line right now in our movement, and it's a fault line which probably cannot be papered over, and that a new what we might call anti-imperialist tendency is emerging. You mentioned some of the people that I really like Gabriel Rockhill and stuff like that. The proposal, and maybe you folks have already thought about it, is that I think it's time for a conference of that tendency. We have the Left Forum It's been sort of inactive. Richard Wolff is still active in it, but it hasn't really been what it was in former years. But it would be terrific if all these tendencies, the anti-imperialist platform, yourself, the radically decisive group. There's so many new ideas and ideas that we don't really know where they're going yet. I mean, because history hasn't revealed it. Like, what's the role of BRICS? But boy, we sure could use the cross-pollination of a conference, and maybe Midwest would be the place to hold it, because that's Midwest. So so I want to throw that out, that idea to you, and then I'll just make a very quick comment about what you talked about, the developing an American Marxism. I really like that idea. The idea is great. The title really sucks, and so that's something maybe to work on a bit. I'm real active in Latin American and Caribbean solidarity issues. Very important solidarity movement. If I use that term, they would jump on me and say that's colonialism, and it is. So the concept is great, but and I realize what you're trying to do is meld the universal and the particular, and the particular has to do with what we call Americanism, but also we need to address the universal, and that's just really a semantic thing, but it's one that maybe some work needs on. But I would like to see what if you folks have been thinking about some sort of synergy amongst the anti-imperialist movement, and then if I get a chance for a second bite of the apple, I'd like to talk about the civil rights movement, but I don't think we're going to get to it today. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think I mentioned in my presentation the all-important aspect of branding, right? It's not just enough to have the right idea. It has to be presented well. American Marxism is just kind of our like placeholder, right? We're sort of formulating what we believe to be the essential aspects of it. And the first is, the synthesis of Du Bois and Lenin and Marx. And then there's the theory. I mean, we don't have to go into all that, but I love the idea of a conference. Even better if it's in Cleveland. You guys can come. I'll cook a meal for everybody. It'll be a good time. But no, I think a conference is a great idea. We've been discussing formalizing some sort of network, right? Of all of these new organizations and the old ones, right? Those old ones have a lot of good people in them. And I think a lot of people are trying to create good, like positive change. I don't think it's a secret that last period of our history was a dark one. The Soviets fell. That was a bad time. And in this country, things fell to pieces, so I think making sure that all of the people that genuinely want to contribute to the concrete class struggle at varying levels of notoriety, education, whatever, could be invited to such a thing. I think it could be the start of something really big. Like really big, the way you explain it, and I'm envisioning it now. I love the idea, and I think we should. If you want to email me or something, that would be great. We could work these things out. Now regarding what was that it, or was there was one other thing, right?
I
think you addressed that first. So
okay, great.
Okay,
thank you.
All right. So also, I have to make an editorial comment. I want to second Roger's suggestion. Sorry, I had to do it, but I think it's really a great suggestion. All right, next, Peter, followed by Jean. Please, Peter, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. By the way, I just want to second what a couple of people have said already, that Noah, your interview with Scott Ritter was really, really, I gotta say, moving initially. I mean, playing the International and opening up with that was really great. And I think politically, it's extremely important to promote those very, very extremely small party, group of people that are actually saying what's really going on in the world. Scott Ritter is one of them. He's got his issues, but it doesn't matter. To be honest, it doesn't matter what his issues are. He's countering the bourgeois narrative that we hear everywhere, always, 24/7, and he's one of the only ones doing it. So more power to him, and thank you for doing that. I got to be honest, I had a kind of some trouble following, what you were describing as the situation in the United States right now. You say great changes are happening, and the decay of imperialism, that kind of stuff. To be honest, I've been hearing about the great changes and the revolutionary potential that's happening this year, and finally we're seeing a breakthrough. And this is I've been hearing this for the last 40 years, so I call me a skeptic, okay, but what is the change? I agree there is. I do agree with you. There is a revolutionary change that's happening, but it is not in the United States. It is in the world. It is the world forces, the strategic balance of world forces has finally, suddenly, not suddenly, but finally starting to change very, very slowly, but without question and there is no chance of reversing this. And that is the real crucial issue, which I think all Marxists have to address and come to terms with. And that is, the inevitable, defeat of the unipolar world, the NATO's military defeat. They have been defeated militarily. This is the first time in history. I mean, okay, we lost the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., but those were not head-on defeats of NATO. They were political, a political defeat more than a military one, and that is really profound. And the impending, cracks that are appearing in NATO today and in the EU are just really astounding. I mean, Hungary just elected a pro-Russian government. I mean, today, right? So these changes are really profound that are happening, and to me that's more important than what is happening with the white working class or whatever in the United States, and what we call ourselves and how we portray Marxism. Those are important, but the world theater, I think, is probably the most significant. But
Peter, just we're at about 3 minutes now, so go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah, but
let me finish. I don't really agree that U.S. has no more productive workplaces anymore, that all work is individualized. I'm starting to see lots of, there always has been industrial production, just very small amounts. But if you look at Tesla in Austin, Texas, that's a 20,000 person manufacturing facility. It's non-unionized, but it was built 2 years ago, and now they have 20,000 people working there. And within a couple of years, it's going to be 60,000. That's the size of River Rouge. I mean, these are massive, massive industrial facilities. So they are there. I don't believe, and my experience tells me and has proven that, workers do not turn away if you say, I'm a communist and this is what I stand for. I myself have run on that platform and have been elected by workers myself. So I know that they do actually agree with Marxist positions, and they'll support communists to the end if someone will actually open their mouth and say that. So that's kind of my perspective. But again, thanks for this presentation. It was a great discussion.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thank
John.
you for the questions, Peter. Real quick, if I gave the impression that I was saying there's no productive industrial labor in the U.S., I was misspeaking. I don't mean to say that at all. In fact, I work in productive industries and have most of my life. But other than that, I think you mentioned something important, that what's happening in the rest of the world is huge. The anti-imperialist bloc is huge, but we have to remember that there is a relationship between that international contradiction between imperialism and anti-imperialism on that level, and the national contradiction of ruling class and working classes. And in our era, I mean, with the waves of radicalization, this comes because of a heightening of the contradictions and things being impossible to go on. In 2008, the primary form of capital accumulation for the ruling class changes. Speculation becomes primary, and debt becomes primary in 2008, right? Now, that's not to say that commodity production isn't still the basis of everything. It is. But things are changing, and this is part of what goes into creating what I call the reproletariat, which is coming into being now, right? Rather than being the sort of dominant thing. And that's the sort of service worker, gig worker, et cetera, in these cut off places. But I also think, and so I think that it's the perfect time for American workers, black, white, whatever, any of any ethnicity, any race, to stand together with workers everywhere else. Because as our ruling class decays, according to the rise of the anti-imperialist countries, that puts us in a unique position to attack them as they try to sort of stave off the repercussions of this fall, this decay, onto us, which they're already doing. We can see with the inflated prices of everything. I've been buying the same groceries for 15, 20 years. 5 years ago, I was spending $200 a month, right? Now, every time I go to the grocery store, it's at least 5, 6. Things are changing, that sort of inflation on this scale, and that's directly because of that international relationship, right? That's the sanctions on Russia. That's the blockades. I don't need to get into a whole thing. I know we're running short on time, but that's another way that our conditions here are connected to that. And what's good for those workers is also good for us. As regards organizing, I mean, it's these days, it's just like you said. I come out, I say I'm a communist, straight up. All of my coworkers love it. Every single one of them, after a few conversations, is on board for socialism itself. I don't know how that was in prior periods. I'm only 42 now, but I know that other people say it wasn't always like that. Regarding like the race issue too, people now, the previous generations, right? The color line, as Du Bois called it, was a legal thing, and this reflected itself in the minds of people. There were masses, millions of people that would say, "I don't want to organize with these people because of the color of their skin." That's gone. I mean, in general, it's gone. There are still like places where this happens, but in general, even when people have genuinely backwards and racist views of some sort, they don't. It doesn't get in the way of that organization. after the political revolution of the civil rights movement. It's no longer legalized, and that moves things forward, changing everything in how we relate to each other. So I don't know. For me, I see it as the most optimistic time of my lifetime at any rate.
Okay, Jean, Norma, Sharon. So Jean, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Noah. This was a great talk. Really, I look forward to it and enjoy your very provocative. I don't say I agree with everything, but you raise really important issues. And thank you. And also thank you for the organizing work in terms of the Midwestern Marx. I tend to be a bicoastal West, either New York or the Bay Area with very little in between, and I appreciate that. But I also want to say in terms of the suggestion for a conference that I put on my shirt this morning, and you may remember almost many of our members went to the U.S. Social Forum that was held in Detroit, I think in 2010. So there's some precedent there, and I think that's a great idea. And I trust it will be on Zoom as well as other things. But as I think I mentioned, I'm a retired union worker, and I still take my dues out of my pension or deducted, and I've always felt that the union movement is extremely important. So I appreciate that, and just wanted to make those comments. But I also wanted to say a more general comment. You raised the issue of China, what's going on there, and the kind of the end of the unipolar world and the multipolar world. And I think that's very important. And my own views, I'm very personally, I've always been more interested in Asia and China than Europe and other parts of the world. And as an anthropologist, I did my research in East Asia. But it's just that what's happening in China, in a global sense, I think is really significant because it's like it's changing the rules of the game. I mean, China has come to power without invading any other country except some unpleasantries in India and Vietnam, but not a major war like the United States is so fond of. And, China has no military bases in any other country, whereas the United States has bases in every other country. China has eliminated poverty and is on the way of doing, with the Belt and Road Initiative. So I just would like you to comment on your thoughts on, we're in a world revolution and the role of China in that revolution. Thank you.
Yeah, you can't overstate the importance of China. You really can't. I think, see, me with my family, everything for me began with my grandparents. So my grandparents, it's funny, my parents met because they're both the children of immigrants, actually. My grandparents on my mom's side are from Ireland. My grandparents on my dad's side are from the Soviet Union. And so a lot of what I was hearing in my house growing up didn't mix with what I'm hearing in school in the 80s, right? When we were still being told that the Reds wanted to nuke us and hated all our freedom. And so that sent me like sort of searching for the truth about the Soviet Union, because it was really weird for me and traumatic in a way to have one of these like institutions, grandparents or school, wrong in such a big way, just wrong or lying. You do that, you find out it was my grandparents telling the truth. But so my focus has always been on the Soviet Union. So these days, because of the importance of China, I'm trying to like play catch up, right? Learn as much about China as I can. But I think all things are governed by their history, right? They're characterized by it. And China's history comes out of a very nationally oriented revolution, right? A revolution of peasants that the way they function internationally has never been the way the Soviet Union did. Their internationalism isn't the Comintern, right? Their internationalism isn't the KGB funding communist parties all over the world, including ours, basically getting ours started. It's this different form, right? Where it's not this direct communist network. But in this new era, they seem to be taking a bigger hand now that they're sort of more stable, for lack of a better word, than they were in the past. Now that they've pulled themselves up to the point where they are comfortable, standing their ground against the empire. They can do things like hold the Marxism symposium, right? They can do things like send people to a conference here where all of these communist parties from all around the world were meeting. And so I think it's exciting to see that kind of thing. I don't think we're going to have, Chinese intelligence agents funding groups here, though I kind of wish they would. But I think this new, more people-focused than ideology-focused form of connection that the Chinese just inherently do is going to be what we see in the future. Just based on them being the leaders now, they're now the leaders of the entire world communist movement, like it or not. And I don't think they do like it. I think they like to make sure other countries develop the way they want to. They take a hands-off approach, but people are coming to them for answers, and I don't think they're going to turn away.
Okay, we're getting near the end of time here.
I'm
Nick?
ready. I'm ready now. If you.
Okay. Okay. Why don't you go ahead, Janet?
I'll make my answers quicker. I'm sorry, Alan. I have a tendency
it's
to
okay. I'm just trying to want to give everybody a chance. Not you. It's all of us. So Janet, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
And let's keep it to 2 minutes. Go ahead.
I'll do my best. Thank
Okay.
you for your presentation and your work. I wanted to give another plug for your recent Scott Ritter interview. He provided a unique historical chronology of what led to the current hostilities in Ukraine going back more than a century. Now to my questions. To me, the union movement here is reformist and legitimizes management and capitalism. Do you think capitalism can be reformed? Also, you talked about 3 levels of Du Bois's
question.
I'm sorry. You talked about 3 levels of Du Bois's work ending in civil rights, but he was a reformist and a Pan-Africanist, not a revolutionary like Garvey, who advocated for African unity or African internationalism, kind of like what's happening in the Sahel right now. I'll paste a link to an article about this in the chat. That said, to me, the root of capitalism goes back to colonization and slavery. And the working class in this country who are not descendants of slaves benefited from that and have been enjoying the legacy of slavery and colonization, including myself. You talked about the need for discipline. Are you familiar with the work of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and the African People's Socialist Party? It is very disciplined. It's not reformist and is based on leading a reparations movement in the form of returning some of our resources to African Americans and Africa itself, whose ancestors were stolen from their lands, brutally brought across the ocean, and forced to help Europeans colonize this land and to build the infrastructure of what became the US with their free labor, and building socialism under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Their work is such a threat to the ruling class that 3 of their leaders were recently indicted by the FBI and accused of being Russian agents, known as the Uhuru Three: O'Malley Yeshitela, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville. I'll stop there, but just as a kind of side note, the Uhuru Three will be appearing in Oakland tomorrow night. I'll paste the details in the chat. I know it was a lot, but
Yeah, no, that's okay. You bring up important points. I'm going to go by them quickly. I hope that's okay, and I hope my answer will be thorough enough. But regarding unions and them being reformist, they absolutely are. Trade union movements are always reformist, but communists within them bring people forward into more than the union, and that's what I think is necessary. Two, regarding Du Bois and revolution, Du Bois joins the Communist Party later in his life and becomes a revolutionary, and his Pan-Africanism was a revolutionary Pan-Africanism at this point. But I think that's not even really what's important. What's important is his theoretical understanding of American history rather than his prescriptive demands in a prior time and place, right? It's this theory that builds the way we need to see the U.S., in my opinion, in the opinion of the Institute, really, because it is an extension of Marxism and Marx's logic to our unique situation. And you mentioned slavery. I would go now. I have a few different opinions on this from yours. I believe that all working class people, as Du Bois did, share an inherent interest in working together against the ruling class. And Du Bois thought that the racism of that time was the biggest tragedy in the world because it's what prevented that. But that's getting up on a tangent. Slavery itself doesn't just build things here, but all of industrial capitalism. Without feeding the British textile mills that cotton, nothing happens. People talk about the importance of the steam engine and coal power, etc. Cotton. They called it the Cotton Kingdom for a reason. Everything was built on chattel slavery. So there's that. And yes, I've definitely heard of the Uhuru movement. The problem is most of the world has not. And I think that means, and I don't know enough about their group to do anything but stand in solidarity with people being repressed for their speech. But what it does is means that there's something going on, right? There's no group right now that can claim the title of a vanguard. There's no group that's a household name. And so building that, however it happens, no matter who thinks it's going to be X or Y, I don't care which one it is. I don't care, if I was right, if you were right, it doesn't matter to me. When that happens, and I believe it will happen, I'm there for it. I'm there helping in every which way I can. And I think all serious revolutionaries should be, regardless of if it happens the way they wanted it to or thought it might.
Okay, Norma, go ahead. Finally, go ahead.
It's okay. Hi, Noah, very exciting. I want to tell you that the problem in the world is that communism is advancing and driving our owners out of their minds. What was really necessary was for Ukraine to surrender. It is one of the paths, one of the many paths to the attack on Russia. I get informed whenever I say that Russia is no longer socialist or Soviet, but that's not the point, and why they skipped that. Well, yeah, these are comrades that told me that. The other thing I'd like to add to what you have to say is that warring is the central commodity in the United States. I'm sure you probably agree. And that we had a speaker a month and a half, 2 ago, named Alexander McKay, you might even know of him, who closed his comments after the recording saying, that the calling for peace is the call for tyranny. Now, that's a real double take kind of an idea. But the idea was, of course, that letting the world get away with the assault, with loving the Madison Avenue advertising explained conflict about Ukraine is so unforgivable on the part of, well, what's called left, that it took me a minute to get what he meant by saying that the call for peace was call for tyranny, because of course Russia has a lot more possibility of struggling for the peace we need than the United States in its present layout.
So
Thank
Noah,
you.
if you could make a quick comment, because we have a couple more. I want to try to get them in before 12:30.
You don't
Go
have to
ahead.
say anything. You can just go on to the next one.
Okay.
He's covered all those things.
All right.
It's up to him.
I love the analogy, the Madison Avenue marketing, though. I will say that.
Okay. All
Of
right. Next
news,
is
the Madison Avenue marketing of news.
Sharon. So please keep it to 2 minutes and go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you. I wanted to say a couple things and ask a question. So I agree with Roger about the brand. I think it would be better to say 21st century Marxism or something like that. There were a lot of anecdotes thrown around today, and anecdotal data is good, but it's not good enough. So I of course agree that the America of 2023 is not the America of 1923 in terms of racism. I mean, we did manage to elect a black president and then re-elect him. But I'm not convinced that racism is still not the main contradiction in the working class. About reproletarianized people. That's a good term. But where I thought you were going, and then you didn't go there at all, was to talk about, so some white people get pushed down into the proletariat, and they are very angry about that. They're suffering a lot. And what happens is they get attracted to the right-wing ideas of you-know-who. And Trump got millions of votes, and a lot of those votes came from the working class. So I think we have to talk about that contradiction. The Communist Party would say that, the Communist Party USA, I mean, would say that the most important thing right now is to defeat Trump next year, because he is a fascist and he will bring fascism closer if he gets back in office. I just wanted to get your reaction to some of that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I want to make it clear. I'm speaking as myself and on behalf of the Institute. But I work with Trump voters. I talk to them. They're in my neighborhood. I'm around them all the time. And these are all poor working class people that have always been working class, always been poor. None of them voted for Trump because he was racist, and they actually considered that a point against him, especially in Cleveland, which is mostly a black city, especially where I'm from on the East Side. All of them only liked Trump because he seemed like he was against the establishment. That's it. Now, he wasn't. He was very much a part of the establishment. I mean, Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, was his Secretary of State. That's as establishment as you get. He governed remarkably similar to Obama, though. And Joe Biden governs remarkably similar to him. In substance, they're all pretty much the same. And if we call one a fascist threat, they are all a fascist threat. And that jives with the Marxist view of fascism, right? Which is that it's the crises of capitalism running up against that impossibility I talked about in the beginning, but the ruling class basically winning out, right? It's not about which ideas they had. It's them going to the lengths that they need to go to in order to keep us down. Now, I don't want to say that there's no racism left in this country. There is. What I said, though, was that this country is now less racist than ever before in its history. And that is a monumental achievement. When I look at class, that, from my point of view, is the primary contradiction, and the struggle against racism is a form the class struggle takes. It doesn't set outside of it. It is a part of class struggle. So Domenico Lacerdo, who's a big influence on me in particular, and the whole Institute really, but me in particular, he has this really great thought device that he talks about, where he talks about the genus being class struggle and the species being an individual struggle. Like the Black Freedom Movement is a species of the genus class struggle. So it's all of us rather than us against each other. And in my experience, I mean, I've been around a few racist kids in high school, but since going into the workforce, I'm just not around it much. Now, maybe that's where I'm from, but most of the people I know aren't racist these days, and it's especially young people. Young people these days growing up in the post-civil rights revolution world are no longer originally taught that they can't play with kids of other races. My parents, when they were young kids, were taught that because of Jim Crow. And this changes things. This is what forms how we think on a subconscious ideological level. So we look at this from the materialist point of view of what creates the way we approach the world. This has to be accounted for. And I think viewing the civil rights revolution as a political revolution does that. Now, I write about it too. So just like I'm kind of glossing over a lot here, but if you'd like, I can email you some of my essays on it. There's also a really good friend of the Institute, Dr. Anthony Montero, who is an inspiration for a few of these ideas. He's the top Du Bois scholar in the world right now. So you could look up his work too. We get a lot of that from him. We talk to him a lot. They're amazing people at his organization. They're called the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation.
Could you please put your email in the chat, Noah?
Okay, last question, if you could keep it really short. Oh, okay, I think that's it. Why don't you, Noah, if you want to just say a few closing words. I want to say this was a really stimulating presentation. The questions were some of the best we've ever had on a wide range of subjects. I want to thank you very much for your presentation. If you have any final words, anything you want to announce, go for it. Noah.
Really, I would just like to say thank you to all of you for inviting me here, for listening to me ramble on like I know what I'm talking about. I had a great time with this, and I think that these discussions we're having are incredibly important. And I think these are the times where I look at them as similar to when Lenin formed the Central Committee, right? Laying the very, very, very groundwork of what becomes something world-shaking, because things have to change right now. They cannot go on the way they are right now. It's not going to work. Something's got to give. And if we don't build something better, it will be something worse. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Raj, if you want to stop the recording, we'll take a moment to save the chat, and we'll wrap this up. So.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, at yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.